So let's bring in our 4th District Congressman Jim Himes, who's joining us now remotely, as all of our guests do during these extraordinary times. Congressman Himes, great to see you here.
Hello, Dennis.
First of all, how are you and your family and your staff handling this COVID-19 outbreak?
We are all well, thank God. Family is doing fine. We're doing better with 2 teenage daughters cooped up in the house than you might have anticipated. And, my staff is flat out. Members of Congress have relatively small staffs, and obviously the need is just huge. So the office is going 24/7, handling, all sorts of inquiries, large and small, for my constituents. And as you know, down here in Fairfield County, we've got the most severe concentration of these issues in the state. So we're working hard.
What is daily life like in Fairfield County? You go out there because the cases are certainly high, and I'm just wondering how it's affecting people, not only physically, but in terms of their morale.
Yeah, well, the majority of people, of course, are really rising to the occasion. I mean, Americans are resilient, pragmatic, and optimistic. So the majority of people are rising to the occasion. And it's just wonderful in the context of everything we're experiencing to see people reaching out to the isolated elderly, to see people dropping food at the food collection that the Stanford first responders did last weekend. Most people are stepping up, but Dennis, of course, as there's an immense amount of anxiety, both fear of contracting the disease, particularly for our elderly, and then there's a lot of economic anxiety. We've suffered along with the rest of the country down here, obviously, with folks that had good jobs a week ago wondering about whether they'll be able to put food on the table next week. So there's just a lot of anxiety.
People certainly are anxious during these times, understandably so. And we're getting many viewer questions about why the White House Coronavirus Task Force is being disbanded in the coming weeks. What do you think about that?
Well, I think the White House has reversed itself on that this morning. I saw that they were considering it. The latest news is that they are reversing that. And Dennis, it's part of an overall pattern, and I've been very focused on what's happening up here in Connecticut. But we had that threat 3-4 weeks ago in which the president said he might somehow seal off New York and Connecticut and New Jersey, and of course that was not something that he could do or ended up doing. So this is just sort of one of those patterns of inconsistent messaging coming out of the White House. And in a moment like this, it would be really good to have a consistent message. The president, I see him sort of cheering on the people who are demanding an opening, even those people who are doing it, with weaponry on the steps of state houses. And, I'm not sure that that's helpful, right? All of us want the country to reopen as rapidly as possible, but we want it to happen safely, right? Not one of us wants a grandparent or a spouse or a child to be lost to this because we opened too early and put people at risk.
How will Congress be reopening?
Well, I'm anxious to get back there. The Senate is back in session this week, and I believe the House should be as well. I think we can do it safely, and we have to do it safely. I was back down there to pass the second installment of the CARES bill just over a week ago, and you make a lot of special provisions, like making sure that there's not more than 20 or 30 people on the floor at the same time, by making sure that staff are working from home. There are ways to do it. We wear masks. We have lots of disinfectant. My belief, Dennis, is, we're asking an awful lot of people, our healthcare workers, our nurses, our police officers, you name it, census workers, to be at work. It's really hard for us to legislate. It's really hard for us to deliberate if we're not, all in the same place. So I'm hopeful that next week we'll be back in action doing it in a safe manner.
Let's talk a little bit about the next aid package that you and your colleagues are working on. What can you tell us about it?
Well, one thing's for sure, which is we are going to need to see aid to states and to localities. And I understand that this has sort of gotten caught up in the political argument. And, Mitch McConnell talking about blue state bailouts was not particularly helpful at a time when his own state of Kentucky is desperate for aid. Bottom line, Dennis, the state of Connecticut, obviously, revenues way down because revenues come from sales taxes and from income taxes, and those sources are way down at a time when expenses are way up as the state works really hard to purchase things like PPE and masks and that kind of thing. And so, if we don't come up with a very substantial aid package for our states and our towns and our cities, what's going to happen is very quickly those states are going to have to, at the moment in time where we need those states and the cities and towns working hardest, they're going to need to start laying off first responders, laying off teachers, making the economic situation worse. Oh, and by the way, the alternative to that is, raising taxes. And this is just not a moment where any state or any municipality should be raising its taxes when people are feeling the economic squeeze like never before.
One thing we've certainly learned during this quarantine is that we are heavily reliant on China for some medical supplies and medicines themselves. What couldn't you do as a congressman to try to get more American companies to make them here? So in the event that this happens again, it's not so difficult to get these supplies.
Yeah, I think there's two things to say about that, Dennis. And, we live in a global kind of, generally speaking, free trade environment. So we always say to ourselves, we should produce and export what we have a comparative advantage in. But of course, this episode really illustrates that there are things that are so strategically important that we want to be able to, if not make them all the time in the United States, we want to be able to at least have the know-how and the capacity to very quickly ramp up the production of that. We do that with petroleum, right? We have a strategic petroleum reserve. There's no reason why we shouldn't have a similar reserve for those kinds of things that would be absolutely necessary in a pandemic. The other thing that would have made this a lot easier was we let too much time go by. We knew, the president knew in January that this could be very serious, but we didn't really get working hard at the federal level anyway. Until early March. That was when the president went on TV and said that, his version of this is serious. We let a good month go by, and we need to learn from this, right? We need to understand that, something breaking out in a town you've never heard of in China could very quickly turn into what it's turned into, which is, 70,000 dead Americans, 2,600 lives lost here in the state of Connecticut. There will come a moment for accountability, but right now what we need to do is dedicate ourselves to making sure that we really learn from this incredibly tragic cost that we have paid.
This is going to be the most remarkable election year that we can remember because you're up for re-election. All the Congress it's 2020, it's a presidential year, yet you can't go out there and have town meetings and go door to door and shake hands and things like that. What is it going to be like for you because the election is only 6 months away?
Yeah, well, I'm not sure anybody really knows. Obviously, we're going to have a lot less in-person stuff. You're not going to see a Republican or a Democratic convention with tens of thousands of people, slapping backs and drinking beer and, playing with balloons and stuff. That's not going to be part of it. So I think, my best guess is that this is going to accelerate a trend that we've seen for a long time in politics, which is the importance of social media and, having conversations the way we're having this conversation, right? I must admit, I hadn't heard of Zoom 2 months ago, and now I feel like I'm a citizen of Planet Zoom. So I think we're going to sort of get kicked hard into the 21st century in terms of our ability to reach out via social media and get the message out in ways that are a lot less traditional, certainly not what we've been used to.
We're trying to figure out what the silver lining is for Connecticut during this whole coronavirus outbreak. Is there one? What do you see?
Yeah, Dennis, I think, I'm an inveterate optimist, and even in the face of the tragedy that we're experiencing, of course there are, right? It's everything from the deeply personal. I'm finding, and I'm speaking for my own family here, I never in my working career have I been able to string together weeks of dinners with my family. I think we're rediscovering each other. We're sort of, remembering what it is like to communicate through something other than screens with our family, which I think is good. At a much more macro level, my two girls right now are distance learning, and we're doing a live experiment in what really works in distance learning and what doesn't work and what can we learn. We are, and more tragically, as I just said, I think we tend to get complacent about things that haven't happened in a long time. I think of my grandparents, the way they thought about going through the Great Depression, because they went through the Great Depression. They were prudent, they saved, they tore up that mortgage. We're going to be conditioned by what we've just been through as a country to be a little bit more prudent, to be a little bit more thoughtful about how we prepare for these kinds of things, investing in all of those things that will be important to combating these kinds of healthcare crises in the future. And so I take some solace in the hope that we will learn from what we've gone through.
Okay, Congressman, a quick and final question. If Joe Biden came to you and said, Congressman Himes, who should I pick for my running mate? What's your recommendation?
Good Lord, Dennis, that's a big one. Obviously, we know that the vice president has committed to nominating a woman, which I think is important. And I'm not sure that I have a preference, and I'm going to respect the vice president's ability to do this without folks like me chewing on his ear.
Congressman Jim Himes, we thank you for joining us this Sunday.
Thank you, Dennis.